For years, there's been one single question that has just hung over the entire Jeffrey Epstein saga, fueling all sorts of conspiracies and, frankly, a lot of public outrage. What exactly was on his infamous list? And who was on it? Well, in this explainer, we're going to walk through the timeline to see how we finally got an answer.
I mean, really, this was the question, right? It drove endless speculation, countless theories, and a ton of political battles. So how did the world finally get a peek behind that curtain? We're going to follow the key events that show us whether this so-called list ever even existed in the first place.
Okay, so to really understand how this all unraveled, we have to go back. We're talking the early 2000s. You have to picture it, an era of just lavish parties, powerful connections. It was the perfect cover for a criminal network that was basically operating in plain sight.
The public part of this story really kicks off right here, in the year 2000. A 17-year-old spa attendant at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, Virginia Jeffrey, is recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, at the time, Epstein was moving in the absolute highest circles, but it's this one event that would eventually become the legal trigger that blew the entire case wide open.
This quote from 2002, which is now pretty infamous, it just perfectly captures how people saw Epstein back then. It shows you just how accepted he was, how deep he was inside these elite circles. It's a statement that, almost 2 decades later, would be put under an intense microscope, really highlighting that close association. But as those first legal storm clouds started to gather, things began to shift. In 2007, after a grand jury indictment in Florida, Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. Now, that was a public turning point for sure, but what was happening behind the scenes was that a whole new wall of secrecy was about to be built.
And that brings us to an event that is absolutely central to this entire story, the 2008 plea deal. Look, it wasn't an end to the case, not even close. It was really the beginning of a decades-long fight over the secrets it kept buried.
So this is the actual time Jeffrey Epstein served. 13 months. After pleading guilty to state charges, he was sentenced to 18 months, but he only served 13, and he had these incredibly generous work release privileges. But you know what? The amount of time he served isn't even the most controversial part of this deal.
This non-prosecution agreement, it was like a legal fortress. It wasn't just about a light sentence for him. It gave this blanket immunity to unnamed co-conspirators, and it locked away thousands and thousands of pages of evidence. This deal is what created the very secrecy that it would take more than a decade to finally break.
So for years after that, the case just kind of faded from the headlines. But then, in 2019, everything changed. New federal charges were filed in New York, and the Epstein scandal didn't just resurface. It absolutely exploded onto the global stage.
The summer of 2019 was just a whirlwind. I mean, in July, Epstein gets arrested, and the whole world is bracing for this trial that promised to expose his entire network. But then, just 1 month later, the story takes its most shocking turn yet. Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. And that trial, well, it was never going to happen.
Now, officially, the medical examiner ruled the death a suicide, but that conclusion did little to quiet the public's suspicion. I mean, it's pretty understandable, especially since his death meant he could never testify. The phrase, Epstein didn't kill himself, became this huge viral thing, and it just perfectly captured that widespread belief that powerful people had something to hide.
With Epstein gone, the fight for answers really shifted. The focus turned to that mountain of documents that were still sealed because of that 2008 deal. And it would be a legal battle, led by survivors, that would finally punch the first real hole in that wall of secrecy.
So, what was the legal key that finally unlocked everything? Well, it was a 2015 defamation lawsuit filed by Virginia Jeffrey against Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, on the surface, it might have seemed like a separate case, but the evidence gathered within it, we're talking depositions, testimony, and names, that would become the central battleground in the fight for transparency.
And this timeline just shows you what a long road it was. After years and years of legal fighting that all stemmed from that 2015 lawsuit, a judge finally ordered the documents to be made public. In January of 2024, the first major batch, over 900 pages, was released, naming high-profile associates, including former President Bill Clinton and Britain's Prince Andrew, and giving the world its clearest look yet at the network.
That 2024 release, though, was just the beginning. That trickle of information just fueled a massive public outcry, and by 2025, the demand for total transparency became, believe it or not, a rare point of bipartisan agreement, and also a really potent political weapon.
At this point, the case was a full-blown culture war. In a viral tweet, Elon Musk made this explosive claim, without any evidence, by the way, and it just reignited this fierce partisan debate. It really showed how the Epstein files were being used as ammunition by all sides.
The White House immediately fired back, calling Musk's statement reckless and false. And this back and forth, it just perfectly captures the intense, high-stakes information war that was raging around all the documents that were still sealed.
But here's the thing. Beneath all that political noise, something pretty remarkable was happening. All that public pressure created this unstoppable political force. The Jeffrey Epstein Files Full Transparency Act just sailed through Congress with overwhelming support from both parties. It basically forced the government's hand. So after years of lawsuits, political fighting, and public demand, the floodgates finally opened. And this brings us right back to that central question we started with. After all that, what did the complete set of files actually reveal?
First off, the sheer scale of this is just staggering. By the end of 2025, between the House and the Department of Justice, nearly 60,000 pages of documents related to the Epstein case were made public. That is just an immense trove of information.
So what was actually in them? Well, everything. Visitor logs from his private island, detailed previously sealed depositions from victims, internal FBI and DOJ memos about the case, email chains between Epstein and his powerful associates. It was basically a complete documentary record of his entire operation.
But here it is. Here's the critical takeaway. The answer to that question we've been asking for years. A Department of Justice memo stated it plainly. Investigators never found a single formal document you could call a client list. The central myth that drove so much of the speculation, it just wasn't real.
The truth was something different, and honestly, in a lot of ways, much more damning. There wasn't one list. Instead, those thousands upon thousands of pages, when you put them all together, they painted this undeniable and incredibly detailed portrait of a criminal enterprise, a whole system of abuse and trafficking that was protected for years by immense wealth and powerful connections.
So, the decades of secrecy are over. The documents are public. That push for transparency, it succeeded. But that leaves us with one final and really crucial question to consider. Is transparency the same thing as accountability? And are open files really enough to deliver full justice?